Sergeant Tom Miller was nearing the end of his shift when something unusual caught his attention. A German shepherd sat motionless by the rusted gate of an abandoned animal shelter. At first glance, Tom could see the dog was thin, battered, and clearly neglected, as though it had been patiently waiting for someone who might never arrive. The fading sunlight highlighted the exhaustion and sadness in the dog's eyes, communicating a depth of suffering that stirred something deep within Tom. Intrigued, he pulled his patrol car over, stepping out cautiously, unable to shake the strange feeling that there was something painfully familiar about the animal. When his eyes finally met the dog's gaze, a chill ran down Tom's spine. It was as if he were staring into a shadow from his own past. Drawn toward the gate, Tom crouched down slowly, ignoring the foul smell of decay emanating from the shelter. His attention focused solely on the dog's worn-out collar, once sturdy but now frayed and covered in grime. With trembling fingers, Tom reached out and brushed away layers of dirt from the metal tag, revealing engraved letters that instantly stole his breath away. Shadow, property of Tom Miller. Shocked, Tom felt his pulse quicken and his stomach churn in disbelief. Shadow had been his loyal 9 partner, missing for 3 long, agonizing years after a chaotic police operation had gone terribly wrong. Tom had long given up hope of ever seeing Shadow alive again. Yet here he stood, battered but miraculously alive, right before his eyes. Tom's heart raced as he whispered the dog's name, his voice cracking with raw emotion. Shadow tilted his head slightly, his tail wagging faintly, signaling a quiet recognition. However, the initial wave of relief soon gave way to a deeper sense of dread. Shadow's frail body bore clear signs of mistreatment, his fur patchy and dull, scarred by violence far beyond simple neglect. The realization filled Tom with anguish and rage. Someone had deliberately hurt Shadow, causing unimaginable pain to a dog who had once risked everything by his side. Tom felt his fists clench involuntarily, a surge of anger fueling his determination to find answers. Questions flooded his mind. How had Shadow ended up here, alone and abandoned? Who could have inflicted such cruelty upon an animal so loyal and highly trained? As the sun dipped further below the horizon, Tom gently led Shadow to his patrol car, his mind racing with a mix of guilt, sorrow, and steely resolve. He knew their reunion was no mere coincidence, and he silently promised Shadow that he wouldn't rest until the truth behind these missing years was uncovered. Tom stared at Shadow, absorbing the painful reality of his condition. Relief at finding his lost partner quickly turned into sorrow as he closely examined the dog's battered body. Shadow's once gleaming coat was now dull and patchy, riddled with scars and marks clearly inflicted through repeated abuse. The dog's bones protruded beneath his matted fur, evidence of prolonged neglect and starvation. Tom's heart ached at the thought of what Shadow must have endured during those 3 missing years. Guilt weighed heavily on him as he questioned how he could have lived comfortably, believing Shadow had died, while in truth his loyal partner was suffering silently somewhere. He ran a gentle hand over Shadow's scarred back, anger bubbling within him, yet he fought to keep his emotions controlled for the dog's sake. Kneeling beside Shadow, he whispered softly, "I'm so sorry, buddy," his voice thick with remorse. Determined to uncover the truth behind Shadow's suffering, Tom wasted no time confronting the shelter employee. He pounded on the shelter's grimy door until it swung open, revealing a disheveled worker who regarded him with bored indifference. When questioned about the dog, the man casually claimed they'd found Shadow wandering the streets a few months earlier, showing no concern about the animal's obvious signs of abuse. Tom didn't believe a word of it. Shadow's condition spoke volumes. This wasn't simply a stray dog found abandoned. Someone had deliberately mistreated him. Tom felt his anger rise as the man continued to shrug off his questions, insisting there was nothing unusual. The evasive answers only intensified Tom's suspicions. He sensed there was something deeply wrong here, something sinister hidden beneath the employee's dismissive tone and detached manner. Frustration and resolve battled inside Tom's chest, but he knew he had to remain calm. He carefully led Shadow toward his patrol car, gently lifting him into the back seat, reassuring the wounded dog with soothing whispers, promising that he would make things right. Driving home with Shadow resting quietly in the back seat, Tom grappled with a storm of emotions: relief, guilt, fury, and determination. He glanced back at his former partner, noting the shallow breathing and the weary look in Shadow's eyes. The realization that someone had deliberately hurt such a loyal, highly trained dog made Tom's blood boil. Each scar on Shadow's body represented a piece of a puzzle Tom was determined to solve, no matter how dark or dangerous the truth might be. Arriving home, he carefully brought Shadow inside, laying out a soft blanket on the living room floor. Shadow immediately sank onto it, releasing a weary sigh as if finally allowing himself to relax, now that he was safe with Tom. Sitting quietly beside the dog, Tom gently stroked Shadow's head, reflecting on the shelter employee's suspicious behavior. His instincts as a seasoned police officer told him that the shelter was hiding something sinister, something that reached far deeper than simple neglect or animal cruelty. Looking into Shadow's tired, trusting eyes, Tom made a silent promise. He wouldn't rest until he unraveled the full story behind Shadow's painful journey, no matter how troubling or risky the path ahead might become. Early the next morning, Tom sat at his kitchen table, the room quiet except for Shadow's gentle breathing as the dog rested at his feet. After a sleepless night filled with unsettling thoughts, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the animal shelter was hiding something. The indifferent tone of the employee and the suspicious circumstances surrounding Shadow's arrival only fueled his suspicion. Determined to uncover the truth, he opened his laptop, combing through online reviews, news reports, and articles related to the shelter. The more he read, the more his anxiety grew. A troubling pattern emerged of unexplained disappearances, neglect allegations, and mistreatment reports quietly swept under the rug. Each revelation twisted his stomach further, reinforcing his belief that Shadow's suffering wasn't random. It was part of something far darker and more organized than he'd initially thought. His instincts as a seasoned cop were rarely wrong, and now they urged him forward, guiding him toward answers hidden just beyond reach. Later that day, armed with evidence and simmering determination, Tom returned to the animal shelter. The building appeared even more dilapidated in daylight, its cracked walls and sagging roof evoking a sense of abandonment. Inside, the pungent smell of disinfectant did little to mask an underlying odor of neglect. Approaching the front desk, he confronted the same disinterested employee from the previous day, pressing firmly for more information about Shadow's past. The man's evasive responses quickly frayed Tom's patience, his dismissive attitude suggesting deeper secrets. As Tom's questioning intensified, the employee finally revealed the name Deborah Watts, scribbled hastily onto a sticky note, a lead Tom knew could be vital. With this new information, Tom felt a grim sense of purpose, but the man's uneasy glances toward a back door heightened Tom's suspicion that something sinister was concealed deeper within the shelter. The discomfort radiating from the employee wasn't just annoyance. It was fear confirming Tom's instincts that he was on the brink of uncovering a dangerous truth. Without waiting any longer, Tom moved swiftly toward the back of the shelter, pushing through a door that led to a dimly lit corridor filled with rusted equipment and stacks of neglected crates. Muffled voices soon caught his attention, and he quietly approached a partially open door at the hallway's end. Peering inside, Tom saw Deborah Watts and another employee arguing heatedly about Shadow, confirming his worst fears. Their conversation made it clear Shadow hadn't been randomly found wandering the streets. Instead, he'd been intentionally hidden, kept off official records to conceal the shelter's deeper connections to illegal activities. Stepping forcefully into the room, Tom demanded immediate explanations. Deborah's face paled as she confessed reluctantly that Shadow had indeed been secretly brought in by individuals whose identities remained hidden, under orders from people she was too frightened to name. The chilling revelation solidified Tom's suspicion Shadow's scars weren't merely signs of random cruelty, they were proof of systematic abuse tied to something far larger. Standing in the cold, dark room, Tom recognized that rescuing Shadow was just the beginning. The real battle had only just begun. As Tom stood confronting Deborah, the tension thickened and a wave of unease settled heavily in the air. She nervously revealed that Shadow had been brought to the shelter secretly, intentionally kept off official records at the request of unnamed individuals. Her trembling voice hinted at a deeper fear, and Tom realized that she was caught up in something far more sinister than she'd anticipated. Before Deborah could fully explain, the distant sound of barking and a sudden heavy thud echoed from further inside the shelter, abruptly silencing her. Her face drained of color, and Tom immediately sensed danger. Without hesitation, he pushed past her, rushing toward the unsettling noises down a dim, cluttered hallway filled with crates and abandoned equipment. His heart pounded with adrenaline, every instinct screaming at him that something deeply disturbing awaited behind the next door. Reaching a heavy metal door slightly ajar at the corridor's end, Tom paused, hearing tense whispers exchanged between Deborah and another man inside. Listening carefully, his blood ran cold as the man's irritated voice reprimanded her for allowing Tom's suspicions to escalate. Deborah's frightened reply confirmed Tom's suspicions. Shadow wasn't a random stray, he was deliberately placed at the shelter, part of a larger operation Deborah desperately wanted no involvement in. Tom forcefully burst into the room, his police badge raised, instantly confronting both of them. Deborah shrank back, panic visible in her widened eyes, while the wiry man beside her adopted a defiant stance. Tom quickly noticed metal cages lining the walls, some empty, others holding frightened, malnourished animals cowering silently in fear. Anger surged through him as he pieced together the ugly truth. Demanding answers, Tom pressed the wiry man aggressively, but instead of cooperation, the man's arrogant smirk returned, warning Tom that Shadow was only a tiny part of a larger, dangerous network, one that Tom was now foolishly challenging head-on. Suddenly, the loud screech of tires broke the tense standoff, jolting everyone's attention toward the shelter's front entrance. Tom's pulse quickened as he realized they weren't alone, someone had been watching, and they were ready to act. Racing toward the front, Tom saw through the grimy windows a black SUV idling ominously near his patrol car. His intuition warned him instantly that this was no random encounter. Grabbing his radio, he urgently called for backup, fully aware that he'd stumbled onto something organized, powerful, and threatening. Moments later, the SUV sped away, leaving only gravel dust and a chilling silence behind. Tom's mind raced with questions. Who were these people? How deeply entrenched was this conspiracy? Returning quickly inside, he found Deborah visibly shaken, her facade completely shattered. The wiry man still stood arrogantly silent, refusing to reveal more. Tom knew Shadow's discovery had opened a door to something dark, deeply embedded, and far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. As police sirens wailed in the distance, signaling approaching reinforcements, Tom braced himself for the troubling realization that rescuing Shadow was merely the first step into a web of cruelty and corruption he was now determined and duty-bound to dismantle. The morning after the confrontation at the shelter, Tom found himself at his kitchen table, surrounded by scattered notes, photographs, and hastily scribbled details from the previous night's encounter. Shadow lay nearby, resting quietly on a worn blanket, occasionally shifting his scarred body with a soft sigh. Despite the lingering pain evident in the dog's movements, there was a quiet resilience in Shadow's presence, mirroring Tom's own determination. Reviewing the intake forms and the cryptic note marked Source Confidential, Tom knew this clue was a thread he couldn't afford to ignore. Understanding that this could unravel the entire sinister operation, he reached out to Detective Sarah Martinez, an old friend and trusted colleague. After briefly explaining everything: Shadow's mysterious disappearance, the suspicious shelter, the evasive employees, and the ominous SUV, he felt relief wash over him as Sarah immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. Her reassurance strengthened Tom's resolve. Together, they would dig deeper, knowing the answers lay hidden beneath layers of deception. Hours later, Sarah returned with critical information. The shelter had ties to a questionable nonprofit called Green Reach, an organization repeatedly flagged but never officially charged for financial misconduct and suspicious activity. More troublingly, Green Reach operated out of the same industrial area where the shelter claimed Shadow had been found, a coincidence too convenient to ignore. With this revelation, Tom felt his suspicions finally validated. It was no accident that Shadow ended up at the shelter. Determined to confront the truth directly, Tom quickly gathered his belongings and signaled to Shadow, who slowly rose to his feet, eager yet clearly weakened from his ordeal. Tom hesitated briefly, kneeling beside his companion, gently reassuring the dog that they would face whatever awaited them together. With renewed clarity and purpose, he drove toward the industrial district, the setting sun casting deep shadows that seemed to mirror the ominous uncertainty ahead. Parking discreetly near the Green Reach warehouse, Tom carefully approached on foot, Shadow close by his side, alert and vigilant despite his lingering injuries. The warehouse appeared deserted at first glance, but a faint light glowing through dirty windows and the occasional silhouette moving within betrayed hidden activity. Quietly slipping through a slightly open side door, Tom immediately sensed something deeply troubling inside. Crates stacked carelessly around the dim interior emitted an unsettling chemical odor, beneath which lingered something more disturbing: the unmistakable scent of suffering and neglect. Carefully moving forward, he spotted two men near a cage holding a trembling, malnourished dog, instantly confirming his worst fears. This was no ordinary neglect, it was an organized, calculated operation trafficking vulnerable animals. Rage and heartbreak battled within him, but Tom remained composed, quietly freeing the frightened animal from its cage. Suddenly, footsteps sounded behind him, and Tom spun around to face a threatening figure wielding a crowbar. Despite his pounding heart, Tom stood firm, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Shadow stepped forward protectively, growling fiercely. In that tense moment, Tom knew he had discovered not just the truth about Shadow's scars, but had stumbled into something far darker, a brutal network of exploitation he vowed to dismantle at any cost. In the quiet weeks following the intense confrontation at the warehouse, Tom found himself slowly rebuilding the bond he'd once shared with Shadow. Each morning began with gentle walks around their neighborhood. Shadow's steps gradually becoming steadier, his scars fading, though never fully disappearing, a constant reminder of the pain he had endured. The investigation had exposed a vast network of illegal animal trafficking, rescuing countless animals from similar abuse. Though the criminals directly involved had been apprehended, Tom remained unsettled, knowing the true mastermind behind the operation remained elusive. Yet, in spite of the unresolved questions, there was a sense of peace in Tom's home. Shadow, though forever changed by his ordeal, once again began to show glimpses of the strong, loyal companion Tom remembered from years past. Tom found himself deeply moved by the dog's resilience. Shadow's recovery symbolized a powerful truth, the capacity to heal and trust again, even after experiencing the darkest cruelty. One cool autumn morning, Tom took Shadow to a quiet park near their home, the leaves rustling softly beneath their feet, creating an atmosphere of tranquility. They paused beside a serene lake, its calm surface reflecting the early morning sun. Kneeling down, Tom gently stroked Shadow's fur, gazing deeply into the dog's gentle amber eyes. In that moment, he recognized the quiet strength and unwavering loyalty that had enabled Shadow to survive against all odds. It struck Tom profoundly how animals like Shadow depended entirely upon human kindness and responsibility. Shadow's story wasn't merely about one dog's endurance, but was a testament to how easily innocence could be exploited by cruelty, negligence, and greed. Yet, through perseverance and compassion, recovery and redemption were possible. Tom felt a renewed commitment not only as an officer but also as a compassionate human being to advocate fiercely for those who couldn't defend themselves. Shadow's journey had reminded him that true courage often lies not in heroic acts but in the quiet, persistent decision to protect the vulnerable, to speak for those who have no voice. Reflecting on Shadow's miraculous return, Tom considered the countless other animals whose voices might never be heard, silently suffering behind closed doors. He realized that their story, while deeply personal, was also universal. Every community likely had its own hidden shadows, animals waiting desperately for rescue and hope. Tom knew the battle wasn't over. It would require constant vigilance, awareness, and courage from everyday people to challenge cruelty and demand accountability. Looking into Shadow's trusting eyes, Tom promised himself he'd continue this fight, not just for his beloved companion, but for every animal still waiting in darkness. Shadow, after enduring unimaginable pain, had come home, healed by the patient kindness Tom provided. Their reunion was not just a happy ending, it was a powerful reminder to everyone watching their story that compassion, responsibility, and courage are choices we make every day. Tom gently patted Shadow, who leaned quietly against him, the peaceful lake behind them symbolizing a new beginning. Together, they'd shown that no matter how deep the darkness, light and healing could still prevail if only someone was brave enough to step forward and care.